I'm going, honey. In this video, I'm going to do the genealogy of Jesus Christ in Matthew. As I thought about Matthew, you have the genealogy of Jesus Christ, you have the birth of Christ, you have the visit of the wise men of Christ, you have the preparation for his advent by John and the baptism of Jesus in chapter 3, and then you have the temptation of Christ in chapter 4, and chapters 5, 6, and 7, you have the teaching of Christ. I'd like to begin with the genealogy. And Matthew is a book full of the Lord Jesus Christ and who he is and what he's done. So in reading the genealogy, it begins, the book of the knowledge of Jesus Christ, or the book of the genealogy, I should say, of Jesus Christ, the son of David, son of Abraham. Notice he's going to divide it up, taking us to David and then back to Abraham. But we're going to start with Abraham. And we're looking at the two covenants, the Davidic covenant of Genesis chapters 12 and following, and then the Davidic covenant, 2 Samuel 7. But we begin in verses 2 to 6, tracing the genealogy from Abraham to David. Abraham begot Isaac, and Isaac begot Jacob. And Jacob begot Judah, and his brethren. Judah begot Pharez and Zerah out of Tamar, and Pharez begot Ezrom. Ezrom begot Aram. Aram begot Aminadab. Aminadab begot Naason. Naason begot Salmon. Salmon begot Boaz out of Rahab. And Boaz begot Jobed out of Ruth. And Jobed begot Jesse. And Jesse begot David the king. So notice we go from Abraham to David. And no doubt Matthew was thinking of the Abrahamic covenant, that in you all families would be blessed, Genesis chapter 12, and then the Davidic covenant as well, that one would reign on David's throne forever. So as we go through this, we have Tamar mentioned, we have Rahab, and we have Ruth, and then we have a reference to Bathsheba out of Uriah. In other words, Bathsheba, you have Ruth, and then you have Jesse begot David. And then we'll go on to talk about Bathsheba. But here we have Tamar, Rahab, and Ruth. Remember, Tamar in Genesis chapter 38 played the harlot. And then we have Rahab, who was a harlot in the book of Joshua, chapter 2, and Ruth, who was a Moabitess. Ruth was a very good lady, but she was a Moabite. And so clearly here, all of these are Gentiles. And if there's one thing that I believe Matthew is teaching in this genealogy, is that Christ has come to bring salvation to Jewish and Gentile people, and also come to identify with sinners in Tamar and Rahab. Ruth basically coming from, can I say, a sinful, not her past, but the Moabite people. So I think those are some themes that no doubt Matthew is thinking. But then we move on. Jesse begot David the king, and David begot Solomon out of the wife of Uriah. Now we come to Bathsheba, out of the one who was the wife of Uriah. And Solomon begot Rehoboam, and Rehoboam begot Abiah, and Abiah begot Asaph, and Asaph begot Josaphat, and Josaphat begot Joram, and Joram begot Uzziam, and Uzzias begot uh, Joatham, and Joatham begot Ahaz, and Ahaz begot Etzikian. Etzikias then begot Manasseh. Manasseh begot Amos, and Amos begot Josiah, and Josias begot Jeconiah and his brethren, leading up to the captivity of Babylon. So notice he now has the next section from David to the captivity of Babylon. And so he's dividing it up into three sections. And so he is named Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, and a reference to Bathsheba, all Gentiles, and three of them sinners, we could say. So clearly, one of Matthew's important themes here is that Jesus has come to save sinners. He has also come to save Gentiles. Then we go on, and after the captivity of Babylon, Jeconias begot Zalathiel, and Zalathiel begot Zorobabel, and Zorobabel begot Abiud, and Abiud begot Eliakim, and Eliakim begot Azor, and Azor begot Sadok, and Sadok begot Achim. Achim begot Eliud, and Eliud begot Eliatzor, and Eliatzar begot Matran, and Matan begot Yaakov, and Yaakov begot Yosef, the husband of Marias, out of whom Jesus was begotten, who is called the Christ. And the out of whom here in the Greek is a feminine genitive haste, clearly referring to the virgin birth, that Jesus came out of, it's a relative pronoun in the feminine gender, in the feminine genitive. Jesus came out of Mary, Marianne, and he is called the Christ, meaning the anointed of God. And so in this genealogy, those are some of the themes. And notice in 17, all the generations from Abraham to David are 14 generations. And from David into the captivity of Babylon are 14 generations. And from the captivity of Babylon unto Christ are 14 generations. Very important. 14, 14, 14. And again, I think Matthew is trying to tell us that David, which means 14 in Hebrew, if we take Dalid, Vav, and Dalid and look at the numbers in Hebrew, Dalid is 4, Vav is 6, Dalid is 4. And if we add them together in some sort of a gematria, we end up with 14. That is looking at numbers as a way of teaching. And I think the point here is we're having a threefold witness in Matthew's genealogy to the number 14. There are 14 from Abraham to David, 14 generations from David to the Babylonian captivity, 14 from the Babylonian captivity to Christ. And what I think we're looking at here again is David, because that's the number 14 is David, and we're having a threefold witness. In Jewish thinking, 2 or 3 establish a case. And I believe Matthew is trying to simply teach that we're looking at Jesus as the final David. And remember, in Ezekiel, we saw that David would come someday, and he is a type of the Messiah. And Jesus then is the final David who has come. I believe that is the theme of Matthew in this genealogy, and he is come to bring Gentiles into salvation as well as sinners, a combination of both, which will then be developed as we look further into the Gospel of Matthew. So we're going to continue then just sort of seeing Christ in Matthew. And this is Christ as we've seen in the genealogy of Matthew.